In the world today, female genital mutilation, FGM, or female genital cutting, FGC, is a widespread practice. In spite of its harmful and sometimes fatal consequences on young girls' and women's health, it has been carried out throughout centuries. The World Health Organization (WHO) estimates that from 100 to 140 million women have been subject to female genital mutilation in 28 countries in Africa and in some countries in Southern Asia and the Middle East. It's also affecting many immigrants in Europe, Australia, and North America.
The mothers and the parents who perform FGM or FGC on their children do so not out of malicious nature and not to punish their children, but more so as a love and a protection of their children, especially their daughters, safeguarding their futures for potential marriage opportunities. Awareness over the last 12 years has improved. People are beginning to understand, but still, if we look at statistics, it's very small in percentage figures. I think people understand now that this is an act of harm when they think about the later consequences of a female's health, childbirthing, or when she gets to a teenage age, of menstrual cycles, how difficult it is. People are starting to become aware.
The United Nations, international and human rights organizations are calling for an end to female genital mutilation and appealing for tougher legislation to halt this practice. FGM is recognized internationally as a violation of human rights of girls and women. It reflects deep-rooted inequality between the sexes and constitutes an extreme form of discrimination against women. It is nearly always carried out on minors, and it is a violation of the rights of children. The practice also violates a person's rights to health, security, and physical integrity, the right to be free from torture and cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment, and the right to life when the procedure results in death. FGM has no health benefits, and it harms girls and women in many ways. It involves removing and damaging healthy and normal female genital tissue and interferes with natural functions of girls' and women's bodies. Every year, over 3 million women and girls face the risk of genital mutilation and cutting. The practice has serious, immediate, and long-term health effects, and it is a clear violation of fundamental human rights. Worldwide, 100 to 140 million females have already undergone FGM. It has become a global problem requiring immediate and targeted solutions. United Nations, international and human rights organizations together are supporting communities to put an end to FGM. Through partnerships with governments, civil society organizations, religious leaders, and community groups, they are making real progress. In 3 years, more than 8,000 communities across Africa and the Middle East have abandoned the practice. Social norms and cultural practices are changing, and communities are uniting to protect the rights of girls and women. Today, the Insider Exclusive goes behind the headlines in FGM, Female Genital Mutilation Victims of Violence, to examine how Sahlu Mikael successfully represents victims of FGM in asylum cases and other very challenging immigration cases. In a decision dated October 14, 2011, the Board of Immigration Appeals held that a woman who suffered FGM had shown that she had suffered past persecution. In this case, the Immigration Appeals Board stated, "Unless it is proved otherwise, it will be presumed that she will suffer the same harm." Accordingly, she was granted political asylum. Many women from around the world have suffered or are at risk of suffering FGM. Many of these women, especially from Africa, are unaware of the fact that this is grounds for a grant of political asylum. If you are a person who has suffered FGM or are at risk of suffering FGM in your country and are considering political asylum in the United States, you should contact an experienced immigration attorney like Sahlu Mikael, who has experience in FGM-related cases. In another well-known decision of a victim of FGM early in her life in the matter of LS, decided February 17, 2012, the U.S. Department of Justice Board of Immigration Appeals held that FGM could form the basis for an asylum claim. Thus, FGM may be considered past persecution based on a protected ground. The Immigration Board went on record stating where a person has been subject to past persecution based on a protected ground, she is eligible for asylum if there is a reasonable possibility that she will face other serious harm in her country, regardless of whether that harm is based on a protected ground and regardless of whether that harm is related to the original persecution. An asylum applicant who has established past persecution but no longer has a well-founded fear of persecution may nevertheless warrant a discretionary grant of humanitarian asylum based not only on compelling reasons arising out of the severity of the past persecution, but also on a reasonable possibility that he or she may suffer other serious harm upon removal to his or her country under the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment. For many years, one of Washington, D.C.'s best immigration lawyers, Sahlu Mikael, founder of the law office of Sahlu Mikael, has worked to expand opportunities for asylum, even if it means advocating to expand the original intent and traditional interpretation of the law to help those in need. For Sahlu, the battle over asylum is not only about giving shelter to persecuted individuals, but also about remaking American legal norms and establishing victim status for a number of officially recognized groups. Sahlu Mikael has earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as one of the best immigration lawyers in Washington, D.C. and in the nation. And through his experience, he has developed successful litigation strategies to help convince judges and asylum officers that FGM victims, trafficking, and forced marriage are forms of persecution, and that people fleeing such persecution may be eligible for asylum. Armed with his knowledge and determination, he is driven to fight for people who cannot fight for themselves. His goals, not only to get justice for his clients, but to make sure that all those who seek valid visa requests are not denied or unreasonably delayed, and to help bring an end to the practice that violates a person's rights to health, security, and physical integrity, the right to be free from torture and cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment, and the right to life when the procedure results in death. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Washington, D.C. It is my great privilege and pleasure once again to introduce Sahlu Mikael to the show. Welcome to the show, Sahlu.
Thank you. Good morning, Steve.
Tell our audience a little bit about the type of law that you primarily practice.
A lot of my work is immigration-related work. Immigration being family reunion, filing for spouses, preventing deportation. A very interesting part of that is the asylum.
Political asylum cases.
Political asylum, yes. Okay. And we also do some accident, but mainly immigration.
Yeah, we've covered a story dealing with human trafficking before. Today we are going to be focusing on another type of political asylum case, which is becoming more common in the sense that the immigration folks are allowing people to stay here, seek asylum, and that is the case of female genital mutilation, or FGM, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Tell our audience what FGM is.
Well, FGM, like you said, it's female genital mutilation, and it is exactly, the name describes the process exactly. Yeah. What happens is that in some cultures, for cultural reasons, mainly for cultural reasons, the females, the women's genitalia is basically cut off sometimes, and the degree of it could vary. Yeah. It could be just a small ceremonial nip, or it could be very drastic, total removal of the female genitalia.
And cultural differences, let's talk about that. That's kind of a tradition, but it really serves no purpose, does it?
No, I don't see any useful purpose that it would serve. Some traditional concepts for those purposes, for example, I think really the main reason is for sexual purity, so to speak.
In other words, to guarantee that a woman, once she becomes of age, when she's ready to be married, that she is a virgin. Is that correct?
That's exactly it.
Yeah, but it's still it's in the real sense, it's a form of torture.
It is. It is. There's no anesthesia. It is actually cutting pieces, sensitive pieces of the body off.
Yeah. What countries is this practiced in?
Oh, there are a lot of countries. It's practiced in some Middle Eastern countries, in some African countries, even within a country itself.
Right.
Some areas practice it, or some tribes or ethnic groups practice it. Others don't. Others will do a mild version of it.
I was unaware that there's some real health hazards involved, both long-term and short-term. What are they?
Oh, there are a lot of health hazards involved. For example, it's done under such unsanitary conditions. Oftentimes, it'll be an untrained person who will do the cutting.
Yeah, and they're called cutters.
Cutters, different kind of names, but cutters basically.
Yeah.
And usually it's a woman.
Yeah.
Who will come in, sometimes with a razor, sometimes with a piece of glass, sometimes with a can, the top of a can if it's sharp enough. So there's the sanitary aspect of it. There's a shock. I had one case where the mother actually testified, not in person, but sent an affidavit where she was very sorry for what she did to her daughter, and this case was in court. And she had lost, previous to this daughter, she had lost 2 other daughters because of this.
They died?
Yes, they died. Lost, yes. They died. Primarily through infection, and I suspect shock also, but these are not really followed up, so a lot of people don't know why that person died.
Yeah.
Later on in life, they have ongoing problems. You see, sometimes also they might be sewn shut.
Yeah. And that's just as unbelievable in the 21st century, but it happens.
Yes.
And there's more than 100 million women, girls and women, that this have happened to.
Yes, yes. And they'll just leave a small opening in order to be able to for bathroom functions.
Yeah.
But other than that, on their wedding night, they might, it's actually a torture, the wedding night. And sometimes they'll have to cut them open with a knife.
Yeah.
So they have, first of all, they'll have sexual problems, most of them, throughout their lives.
Right.
They have, not only to them, the health problem could be even to their children. I had one case where, because of the scarring, the sewing, the opening, the birth canal was so narrowed that the children being born suffer oxygen deprivation.
Right.
Just so they get stuck and they suffer oxygen deprivation, and they're born with brain injuries.
Cerebral palsy, for example.
Yes. They cannot, the last case that I had like that, the child could not function.
There must also be some very long-lasting psychological scarring.
Yes.
I mean, sex is not pleasure to them. And this is going on and on. Now, the reason that we are doing this show is because some international organizations and lawyers like yourself are getting directly involved in getting some of these women and girls seeking successfully asylum in the United States. And tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yes, it's become somewhat more friendly for these kind of cases. In about 2007, I had a case. At that time, the woman suffered terribly. She's a grown woman now, but the age could vary when it's done. It could be as an infant where they don't remember anymore, they just have health problems, or it could be done when they're older, 12, 15, sometimes right before marriage. Now, the problem at that time was that, and this is up to about 2007, 2008, if they've already had that procedure performed on them, then that's it. They no longer have that fear, so they can go back to their countries, so to speak, and they will not suffer that pain again.
But that's not true, is it?
That's
and tell our audience why it isn't true.
Because, as you recall, I just mentioned that sometimes they're sewn shut. On the wedding day, they might be reopened. Or even for childbirth, they might be reopened. After that, and this is no longer to preserve the woman's virginity, but it's really to preserve dominance over the woman, to make sure she doesn't stray.
Yeah.
They'll sew her up again.
But that goes on.
And it go on.
Yeah.
Every time she has a child, she could be sewn back up again. Now, that is one of the things in 2008, I believe, in September of 2008, the court recognized this. See, one of the problems that I had initially was that if a woman had already had FGM performed, like I said, she will not have it performed again.
Right.
So immigration courts tended to deny them because there's nothing to fear. It's already been done, whatever's been done, and it's not going to happen to you again, so you can go back.
Right.
And frankly, when you look at a lot of these women, they look perfectly normal. You can't tell the scars that they suffered. It's a lot of them is inside, on their bodies also, but where people can't see them. So when they appear in front of an immigration officer or in front of the court, they don't generate a lot of sympathy until you go in and hear a lot of their stories.
And you have successfully been able to get asylum for some of your clients.
Yes.
By having the woman describe what has happened to her and what is ongoing. You're actually educating the immigration board, aren't you?
Yes, that's what we try to do. The woman will describe, I have them describe every aspect of it in detail. My main goal when I have the woman testify and produce evidence, whether it be medical or otherwise, is to make it so compelling that the judge and the prosecuting attorney, the opposing counsel, would literally squirm in their seats, not wanting to hear more.
Yeah, in two recent cases, one of them was yours. We have learned that the Board of Immigration Appeals decided that even though a woman has had this procedure already, that she could be subject to additional torture by being returned to the same country and society where she came from. And that way, they granted her political asylum. Is this the trend now for all women who have gone through this procedure, have suffered through this procedure?
Yes, there are two aspects to it.
Okay.
And by the way, that case was not mine, but we were preparing a case. Well, let me back up. At the time that I had a particular case, I'll call her FO for her name and initials, from Somalia. In her case, the law was, like I mentioned earlier, if it's already happened, then
no problem.
No problem.
Yeah.
Now there's an exception to immigration law. Immigration law says that if you've already suffered past persecution, then you'll get, there's a good chance you'll get political asylum. I'm simplifying this.
Yeah.
However, if conditions have changed so that you no longer have that fear of persecution, then you can go back. And that's where the law was at the time. But also there was another exception that said if the persecution that you suffered was so terrible that it would be really inhumane to ask you to go back to that country, then in its discretion on humanitarian grounds, the court can grant political asylum.
Yeah.
Now, it hadn't been used for asylum for FGM cases, but that's the case that I wanted, that's the argument that I wanted to present.
Yeah.
While I was doing that, just about maybe a week or two before my trial, the Board of Immigration Appeals came down with a decision basically on the same ground, saying that if the woman was old enough to feel it, if she remembers it, if there are lasting health consequences because of that, then the court can, in its discretion, grant political asylum.
Are you getting a lot more cases like that now that the United Nations, now that international organizations are becoming more involved with trying to change this cultural torture? Are you getting more cases of people contacting you regarding this?
Yes, more than before. But also, one of the problems is that sometimes attorneys are not aware
of the new law,
whether it's the new law or even the do not ask. For example, one of my cases, she'd gone through all the way from the asylum office, immigration denied it, the court denied it, went on to appeal, and the female FGM was never mentioned. Then on a technicality, the case came back to court, and that time she talked to me about representing her. And because I knew the cultural background of that country.
You were able to bring that up?
Yes.
And that was one of your successful cases?
Yes, that's correct.
Well, for everyone that is watching this, I hope we have given them the idea that they can seek political asylum if they have experienced this kind of a torture, because going back to those societies might endanger them again. Or the experience may be so bad that their psychological damage of going back to that same environment might be the same.
That's correct.
And I want to thank you very much for spending time with us on the show. Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.